Princess Lyra of Varner was known throughout the galaxy for one thing: her hatred of Earth. She had heard the stories, seen the reports, and studied the humans. To her, they were barbaric, primitive creatures, living on a dull and backward planet. She could never understand how such a place had managed to be a part of the Galactic Alliance. As the heir to the throne of Varner, Lyra had spent most of her life in luxury, surrounded by beauty and advanced technology. Her kingdom was rich in resources, and its people were proud of their sophisticated ways. But when it came to Earth, she had no respect. The humans had caused trouble in the past, and to her, that was enough reason to hate them. Today, however, was different. Today, something was happening that would shake her world to its core. Lyra stood at the grand hall of Varner's palace, her bright purple robes flowing around her. The room was filled with important officials from across the galaxy, all waiting for a moment they had been anticipating for weeks. They were waiting for the reading of the Galactic Will. The Galactic Will was a document written by Lyra's late father, King Archon. It was a powerful decree, one that could change the future of entire star systems. And this one, in particular, held a surprise that none of them were expecting. As the head of the council stepped forward to read the document, Lyra couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Her father's health had been failing for some time, and she had feared this day would come. But nothing could have prepared her for what was written in the will. The counselor cleared his throat and began reading aloud. By my hand, King Archon of Varner, I hereby declare that the future ruler of Varner will be the human from Earth, James Parker, who has been selected as the heir to my daughter, Princess Lyra. Lyra froze. Her mind raced. What? The human? She thought. It couldn't be true. It wasn't possible. The room fell into stunned silence. The officials exchanged confused glances. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, trying to process the words she had just heard. The Galactic Will could not be questioned, and it was clear now that her father had chosen a human to inherit his throne. But why? What could he have been thinking? Lyra's face flushed with anger. She had always known her father had a soft spot for Earth. He had often spoken of its people with a certain curiosity. But this was beyond anything she could understand. Her blood boiled with rage. How dare he? She muttered under her breath. She could feel her pulse quicken as the room began to buzz with whispers. The counselor continued reading, oblivious to the growing tension in the room. James Parker, he said, shall inherit all rights to the royal family's lands, treasures, and the throne of Varner. He is also bound by the laws of Varner to meet with Princess Lyra at once and begin his new role as co-ruler. The words hit Lyra like a slap to the face. A human. Co-ruler. This was madness. She stepped forward, unable to contain her fury. This is an outrage, she declared, her voice trembling with emotion. I will never accept this. A human cannot rule alongside me. He is beneath us. The counselor tried to calm her. Princess Lyra, the law is clear. You must meet James Parker and discuss your future together as co-rulers. It is your father's wish. Lyra turned away, her anger rising like a storm. She had never felt so insulted in her life. The thought of sharing power with a human was unimaginable. Her father, who had always been so proud of their royal bloodline, had chosen a human over his own daughter. This was betrayal. You don't understand, she said, her voice icy with fury. I refuse to meet him. I refuse to even acknowledge his existence. He is nothing but a weak, primitive creature from a planet of dust. But despite her outburst, the reality of the situation began to settle in. She couldn't fight the will. It was the law of the galaxy. She would have to meet this human, whether she liked it or not. As the room continued to murmur around her, Lyra's mind raced. She couldn't let this human take her throne. She would go to Earth, find James Parker, and show him who was in charge. She would make it clear that a human would never rule Varner, not as long as she was alive. With a sudden, sharp decision, she turned back to the counselor. Prepare a ship, she said coldly. I'm going to Earth, and when I find James Parker, I will make sure he understands the true power of Princess Lyra of Varner." Her voice rang with authority, but inside, she was filled with doubt and fury. Earth, a planet she had always despised, was now her next destination, and the human she had always considered beneath her was about to become a part of her life, whether she liked it or not. A human's new world. James Parker had always lived a simple life. He was just an ordinary guy from Earth, working at a small tech company, living in a small apartment, and spending his free time watching movies or playing video games. Earth was a crowded place, full of noise and chaos, but James had never complained. It was home, and he liked it that way. That is, until the day everything changed. It started with a strange email. At first, James thought it was a joke. The message came from a group called the Galactic Council, a name he had only heard in science fiction stories. It claimed that James had been chosen to inherit a throne on a distant planet called Varner, a planet in another galaxy, with technology and a culture far beyond anything Earth had ever known. The email told him that he had been chosen as the heir to the throne, along with the title of co-ruler of the kingdom. James stared at the message, his mind spinning. This had to be some kind of prank, right? A scam, maybe. But when he clicked on the link, a holographic image appeared in front of him, showing the official seal of the Galactic Council and a voice that seemed so real it almost made him jump. "James Parker," the voice said, "you have been selected to rule alongside Princess Lyra of Varner. The decision has been made. You must prepare to travel to Varner immediately." For a moment, James thought he might be dreaming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked at the message again. But it was still there, and so was the voice, telling him to pack his things and get ready to leave Earth. The message said that all the arrangements had already been made, and that a ship would be arriving to take him to Varner. He sat back in his chair, feeling like the world had turned upside down. What was happening? Why him? He was just an average guy from Earth. He had no royal blood, no special skills, nothing that would make him a suitable ruler for another planet. But there was no time to think about that now. The message told him to prepare, so James did what any confused person would do. He packed his bags. Hours later, he stood outside his apartment, staring up at a sleek, silver spacecraft. It hovered silently above the ground, its engines glowing softly in the evening light. The door of the ship opened, and a voice from inside called out to him, "James Parker, please step inside." James took a deep breath and walked toward the ship. This was real. This wasn't a dream. And he wasn't dreaming anymore. A human from Earth was about to travel across the galaxy, to a planet he had never heard of, to meet a princess he knew nothing about. Once inside the ship, he was greeted by a small crew of aliens, humanoid figures with pale blue skin and large expressive eyes. They introduced themselves briefly, but their language was so complex that James couldn't quite understand everything they said. However, they were kind, and they made him feel comfortable as they prepared for takeoff. The journey to Varner was long. James tried to sleep, but he couldn't stop thinking about what was happening. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of the strange planet he was heading toward, and the mysterious princess who had somehow chosen him as her heir. What did she think of him? What kind of ruler was she? And why had his father, whoever he was, chosen him, a mere human, to rule alongside her? James had a million questions, but no answers. He felt completely out of place, like a fish out of water. He had never imagined anything like this happening to him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the ship arrived in the Varner system. The planet was breathtaking, its surface covered in lush green forests and vast oceans that sparkled under the light of distant stars. James gazed out the window, amazed by the sight. As they descended toward the capital city, he saw grand buildings made of crystal and steel, towers that stretched high into the sky. The city seemed to glow with an inner light, a kind of energy that James couldn't explain. It looked like something straight out of a science fiction novel, except this was real. The ship landed smoothly in a large open area. As the door opened, James stepped out and was immediately greeted by a group of royal guards. They were tall and imposing, with armor that shimmered in the sunlight. Their leader, a tall alien with silver skin and dark eyes, stepped forward and spoke in a language James couldn't understand. But the alien smiled and gestured for him to follow. James walked through the city, taking in the sights. He had never seen anything like it. The people of Varner were unlike anything he had imagined. Tall, graceful beings with different skin tones and glowing eyes. They moved with a sense of purpose, and there was an air of sophistication that James couldn't ignore. Eventually, they'd reached the palace, a massive structure that seemed to be made entirely of crystal. Inside, it was even more impressive, with huge halls and rooms filled with ancient artifacts and advanced technology. James was led to a large chamber where a woman stood waiting for him. She was tall and regal, with long flowing hair that shimmered like silver in the light. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, glowed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. This, James realized, was Princess Lyra. She didn't look happy to see him. Lyra stood tall, her posture proud, and her gaze icy. James knew immediately that she wasn't going to make this easy for him. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was certain. He had a lot to learn if he was going to survive in this strange new world. The princess's cold stare sent a shiver down his spine. But there was no turning back now. He was in Varner, and his new life had just begun. First meeting. James stood in the grand chamber of Varner's royal palace, feeling out of place. The walls were made of smooth, glowing crystal, and the air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. Everywhere he looked, strange alien symbols adorned the surfaces, some of them lighting up softly as he moved. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was the woman standing in front of him, Princess Lyra. She was tall, almost a foot taller than James, and her long silver hair flowed around her like a cloak. Her violet eyes were sharp, and they studied him as if he were an interesting but puzzling specimen to be examined. The silence between them felt thick, like an invisible wall, and James didn't know what to say. Lyra was beautiful in a way that made it hard to focus. Her features were regal, delicate, but also sharp. She had the air of someone who was used to being in control, to commanding respect. And right now, she was looking at James like she had just been told she had to share her throne with a pig. "Are you the human they sent?" Lyra's voice was calm, but there was a coldness to it that made James feel small. Yes, that's me." James shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, trying not to squirm. "James Parker." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Parker, you're the one who was chosen to inherit my father's throne." She spoke the words slowly, as if she couldn't believe them herself. "Apparently," James replied, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I didn't ask for this, you know. I'm just as confused as you are." Her expression didn't soften. Instead, she raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest. "You think I care about your confusion, human?" Her tone was sharp, and James couldn't help but feel a little nervous. "You're here now, and you're the one my father picked, so you'll have to live with it, whether I like it or not." There was a tension in the air, and James could feel it pressing down on him. He didn't know how to handle it. He was used to people at work being a bit cold or dismissive, but this was different. This was a princess, a royal ruler of an entire planet, and he, a simple guy from Earth, was supposed to rule beside her. It seemed impossible. "I'm not your enemy," James said, trying to stay calm. "I didn't choose this. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here." Lyra didn't respond at first. She walked slowly around him, examining him like he was a piece of art in a gallery. James stood still, trying not to look like he was getting more nervous by the second. "Earth is weak," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the silence. A planet full of primitive creatures, fighting wars over scraps. What could you possibly offer me? What could you possibly offer my people? Her voice was full of disdain. You have no power, no strength. James felt a pang in his chest. He knew Earth wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But the way she spoke about it, like it was nothing, made him angry. He wanted to tell her that humans had their own strengths. They were capable of great things, things even aliens couldn't imagine. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet, at least. I don't know, James admitted, his voice quiet. But I'll try. I'll try to do what's right for everyone. Lyra stopped in front of him, her piercing violet eyes locking with his. You'll fail, she said simply, her voice cold as ice. You are nothing but a human, and I will not bow to you. James took a deep breath, the words stinging, but he refused to back down. I don't want you to bow to me. I want to work with you. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom, but I'm willing to learn. I'm not here to replace you, princess. I'm here to help. Lyra seemed to consider this for a moment. The sharpness in her eyes softened just a little, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned and motioned for him to follow. Follow me, she said, her voice steady, but still filled with a certain command. I will show you what you need to learn. James followed her down the long corridor, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe this was happening. One moment, he was just an ordinary guy on Earth, and now he was following an alien princess through a palace on another planet. His mind was still spinning. Lyra didn't say another word as they walked. Her long strides echoed in the quiet halls, and James had to hurry to keep up. As they turned a corner, they entered a large room filled with strange, glowing objects and advanced technology. At the center of the room, there was a large map showing the planets of the galaxy, each one lit up with different colors. This is the control room, Lyra said, her voice now softer, more focused. This is where the decisions are made, where our kingdom's future is decided. You will need to learn how to read the maps, understand the laws, and work with the advisors. If you plan on being my co-ruler, you need to understand this. James looked at the map, feeling overwhelmed. It was beautiful, but so complicated. The lines and symbols made no sense to him. He could barely understand the alien language on the walls, and he hadn't even begun to grasp the culture of this planet. He didn't belong here. But he couldn't back out now. He was stuck with this, stuck with being the heir to the throne of Varner, stuck with Princess Lyra. Okay, he said quietly. I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to help. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small sigh, she turned back to the map. We'll see if you can live up to that, she said softly. We'll see. And in that moment, James realized that this was only the beginning of his strange new life in the galaxy, and that no matter what, he had to prove himself, not just to Lyra, but to the people of Varner, and to himself. Proving himself. James stood in the royal training hall, feeling the weight of his new responsibilities pressing down on him. The room was vast, filled with strange machines, weapons, and alien technology that he didn't understand. It was unlike anything he had seen on Earth. He had no idea how he had ended up here, trying to prove himself in front of Princess Lyra and her advisors. But he was determined to try. Lyra had not made it easy for him. She had dismissed his words of cooperation in their first meeting, leaving him with the cold, bitter feeling that he would never be good enough for this role. Yet, James had no choice but to push forward. He had to prove that he could handle whatever Varner threw his way, that he could be more than just a human from Earth. He had to show Lyra and the entire kingdom that he was worthy of the throne. Today, a tall, muscular alien commander named Kalen said, "You will train. You must learn to fight, to defend yourself, and to lead your people. Your first test will be against me." James turned toward Kalen, who stood at the center of the room, arms crossed and waiting. He looked like a warrior from a storybook, tall and imposing, his skin a deep shade of red, with markings that ran across his face and body. James gulped. He wasn't a fighter. On Earth, he had never taken a self-defense class, never been in any serious physical confrontation. What was he supposed to do? "You're supposed to be a king," Kalen said, his voice gruff. "A ruler must be strong. You cannot rule from a throne if you cannot defend yourself." James swallowed, trying to gather his courage. He had to do this, for Earth, for Varner, for his place beside Lyra. He nodded, stepping forward. The moment he took a step, Kalen lunged at him. James barely had time to react as the alien's fist swung toward him with lightning speed. He dodged just in time, stumbling backward. Kalen's movements were smooth and quick, like a predator hunting its prey. James had no idea how to fight like that. He didn't know the first thing about alien combat. "You're slow," Kalen taunted, circling around him. "Is this how humans fight?" Pathetic. James gritted his teeth. He wasn't going to back down. He had to prove something, not just to Kalen, but to himself. He steadied his breath, looking for any opening. The next time Kalen attacked, James ducked and sidestepped, barely missing the alien's blow. His heart raced in his chest, but he knew he had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to be slow or weak. Kalen grinned. "Not bad, human, but you'll need more than luck to defeat me." James could feel the pressure building, his muscles aching with every move. He had to think fast. Kalen swung again, but this time, James anticipated the attack. He blocked the punch, though the force of it sent a shock through his arm. He quickly countered with a low kick, knocking Kalen off balance. It wasn't much, but it was something. Lyra, who had been watching from the sidelines, narrowed her eyes, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She seemed intrigued, but not impressed. James could feel her gaze on him, and it only fueled his determination. Kalen recovered quickly, his face twisting into a snarl. "You'll need more than luck to become a ruler. You must master combat if you wish to survive here." James panted, sweat dripping down his face. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't a quitter either. He was beginning to realize something. This wasn't just about fighting. This was about proving he could adapt, that he could take on challenges, that he could do things that seemed impossible. He wasn't going to give up. Again. Kalen shouted, charging at him again, faster this time. James wasn't ready for it, and Kalen grabbed him by the arm, twisting it behind his back. The pain shot through his body, but James gritted his teeth and used his free arm to jab his elbow into Kalen's ribs. The move wasn't perfect, but it gave him enough space to break free. "Not bad, human," Kalen said again, though his tone held a hint of respect now. "But you're still too slow." James took a deep breath, his mind racing. What could he do? He didn't have Kalen's strength, his alien speed, but he did have one thing the alien didn't: adaptability. Earth wasn't perfect, but humans had learned to survive by being clever, by thinking outside the box. As Kalen lunged again, James sidestepped, but this time he grabbed a nearby training staff and swung it toward Kalen's legs. The staff hit its mark, and Kalen stumbled, giving James just enough time to land a punch to his jaw. Kalen's head snapped back, and James felt a rush of adrenaline. Kalen stood up, grinning. "I underestimated you, human. Maybe you do have something after all." Lyra stepped forward, her violet eyes studying James with a new level of interest. James was breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. But he didn't care. He had done it. He had proven that he wasn't just some weak human who couldn't hold his own. "That's enough," Lyra said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to Kalen. "He's not perfect, but he's not worthless either. He has potential." James stood up straight, wiping his brow. The fight had been hard, and he was far from winning, but Lyra's words felt like a victory in themselves. For the first time since he had arrived on Varner, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. You still have a long way to go, Lyra continued, her eyes softening just a little. But I will give you a chance to prove yourself, James Parker. You've earned that much. James nodded, a sense of pride swelling inside him. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. He wasn't going to give up. He couldn't, not when there was so much at stake. Thank you, he said, his voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes. Lyra nodded, her expression still cold, but no longer dismissive. We'll see if you can live up to that, human. As James walked away, he knew the journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't just some earthling. He was someone who could fight, someone who could prove that he belonged on Varner. And that was just the beginning. The growing bond. James couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between him and Princess Lyra. Ever since the training session, she had been less distant, less cold. She still maintained the air of royalty and power, but there was a subtle shift in the way she looked at him, the way she spoke. It was as if, after that fight, she was beginning to see him as more than just an outsider, more than just the human hair she had to tolerate. But he wasn't sure. He didn't know if she was truly starting to trust him, or if this was just part of her royal duty, if, deep down, she still hated him. That day they met again in the royal gardens, a place James had come to admire. The flowers were unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth. They glowed with a soft light and changed colors as the breeze passed through them. It was peaceful, and for a moment, James could forget the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. Lyra was already there when he arrived, standing by a fountain, her gaze distant as she watched the water ripple. She seemed lost in thought, and James hesitated before approaching. He wasn't sure if she wanted company, but he had learned that sitting around and waiting wasn't going to get him anywhere. He had to be brave, even when it felt like he was out of his depth. "Princess," he said gently, breaking the silence. Lyra turned toward him, her violet eyes locking onto his. For a brief moment, there was something softer in her gaze, something that wasn't filled with disdain. She nodded but didn't say anything, instead motioning for him to sit beside her. James sat down, a little unsure of himself. He had never imagined sitting in a royal garden with an alien princess, let alone one who had once viewed him as nothing more than a nuisance. But here they were, together in this strange new world. "I've been thinking," Lyra said, her voice quiet, "about your people, about Earth." James blinked, surprised. "What about Earth?" She looked down at the fountain, her fingers tracing the water's surface. "I've always believed that humans were weak, unworthy of ruling beside us. But maybe I was wrong." James wasn't sure if she was just being polite or if she truly meant it. He had heard her harsh words during their first meeting, and they still stung. But this felt different. He decided to press on. "What changed?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. Lyra hesitated, then looked at him, her eyes searching his face. I think I underestimated you. Your ability to adapt. The way you keep pushing forward, even when everything seems impossible. I've never seen anyone like you before." James felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of respect he had gotten from Lyra. It made him feel like he was starting to matter, like he was more than just a piece of a galactic will. "I'm not perfect," he said quietly. "I'm just doing the best I can. But I'm glad you're starting to see that. I know it's not easy." Lyra looked away for a moment, her expression unreadable. "It's not easy for me either. Having someone I don't know, someone from a planet I despised, suddenly become my equal. It goes against everything I was raised to believe. But," she sighed, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, "I can't ignore the truth. You've proven that you belong here. I didn't want to admit it, but you've earned my respect." James's heart raced. It was the first time Lyra had said anything close to an apology, even if she hadn't used the word. To him, It felt like a small victory. "Well, I'll keep proving it," he said with a smile. "I won't give up. Not on you, not on Varner." Lyra didn't smile back, but her expression softened, the sharp edge of her demeanor dulling just a little. She looked at him for a long time, as if weighing something important in her mind. "There's something about you," she said slowly, almost to herself. "You're different. I've never met anyone like you, not just humans, but anyone. You make me question everything I thought I knew." James was quiet, not sure how to respond. He didn't want to push her, but the words were hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. He wanted to say something, something that would make her see him not just as an heir, but as someone who could stand beside her, someone who could support her. "You know," he said after a pause, "we're not all bad. We've made mistakes, of course. But Earth's got heart. We fight for each other, for what's right. Maybe that's what we can bring to the table here. Maybe I can show you that humans have a lot more to offer than you think." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable again. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up, brushing off her dress. "Maybe you're right," she said softly. "Maybe there is something more to you, James Parker. But it's not just about what you can offer me, or what you can offer Varner. It's about whether you can survive here. It's about whether you can survive me." James stood as well, meeting her gaze. "I'll try my best." Lyra looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded, turning back toward the palace. "Let's see if you can. There's much more to learn, and the stakes are higher than you know." James watched her walk away, feeling a sense of determination rise in him. This wasn't just about proving he could rule beside her anymore. This was about something deeper, a connection that was slowly beginning to form between them, one that could change everything. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since he had arrived on Varner, he felt like he had a chance not just to prove himself, but to prove to Lyra and the people of Varner that he belonged here, beside her. As the sun set over the royal gardens, James realized something. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something more than just a royal duty. Maybe it was the beginning of something that could change both of their lives forever. Facing the real enemy, James sat in the war room, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The large holographic table in front of him flickered with maps and images of Varner's borders, showing the growing threat of an enemy fleet. He had been on this planet long enough to know that this was no longer just a political game. The stakes had risen. The real enemy was on their doorstep, and there was no time to waste. Lyra stood beside him, her face grim as she studied the display. The princess was more focused now than he had ever seen her. Gone was the royal indifference. In its place, there was a fire in her eyes, a determination to protect her people. She had been raised to rule, but now she was learning how to fight for what was hers. "Do you understand what this means?" Lyra's voice was steady, but there was a hardness to it. "The Zorethians are ruthless. They won't stop until they have taken everything we've built. They don't negotiate. They destroy." James nodded, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He hadn't expected to be involved in something like this so soon. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained in the art of war. But here he was, standing in a room full of generals, alien diplomats, and military leaders, all looking to him for guidance. "We don't have much time," one of the generals said, pointing at a spot on the map where the Zorethian fleet was rapidly approaching. "They'll be here within 3 days. We need a plan, and we need it fast." James felt the pressure building, but he couldn't afford to crack now. He had to think. He had to help. He glanced at Lyra, hoping to find some direction in her eyes. What could he contribute to this? What could a human like him possibly offer that could help win a war? "You've trained for this moment, James," Lyra said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "You might not have the experience, but you know how humans fight. You know how to adapt. That's what we need right now." Her words brought him a strange sense of calm. They weren't just words of encouragement. She was right. Humans had survived by adapting. That's what had made them strong. Maybe that was what they needed here. A new approach, something the Zorathians wouldn't expect. We need to use the terrain to our advantage, James said, surprising even himself with the confidence in his voice. The Zorathians are used to direct, open combat. But this planet, it's full of areas where they can be ambushed. We can use the forests, the mountains, the caves. We don't need to fight them head-on. We can wear them down, force them into positions where they're vulnerable. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes narrowing with interest. Go on. We can set up traps, disrupt their supply lines. If we hit them fast and hard where they least expect it, they'll start to panic. We don't have to win all at once. We just need to make them think they're fighting a much bigger force than they are. A general, a tall alien with dark blue skin, stepped forward. That sounds unorthodox, but it might just work. The Zorathians aren't prepared for guerrilla tactics. Lyra nodded slowly. It's risky, but it could give us the edge we need. She turned to James, her expression softening slightly. I think you're right. We'll need to act quickly, and we'll need to be unpredictable. James felt a wave of relief. He wasn't alone in this. He had a role to play. The tension in the room seemed to ease, but only a little. The threat was still very real. They had to act fast. We'll need your help, James, Lyra said, her tone serious once more. We'll need you to lead the human forces. Your people know how to fight in ways we don't understand. You'll be in charge of coordinating the ambushes and surprise attacks. James blinked, surprised by her words. Lead. He had no idea what he was doing. But then again, neither did anyone else. This wasn't about being a perfect leader. It was about doing what was necessary to survive. And for the first time since arriving on Varner, James felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. I'll do my best, he said, his voice steady. I won't let you down. Lyra nodded, her face hardening again. Good. We'll need everyone working together if we're going to win this. James turned back to the map, studying it carefully. The Zorathians weren't just a military threat. They were a symbol of everything Varner had built. The peace, the prosperity. Losing this war would mean the end of everything. The pressure was immense, but James had no choice. He couldn't fail now. For Lyra, for Varner, for Earth, a new beginning. The sun was setting over the alien world of Varner, casting a warm orange glow across the land. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. The Zorathians had been pushed back, their fleet in disarray. But James knew this was only the beginning. They had won a battle, not the war. There was still much to be done. James stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out at the vast landscape below. His mind was still processing everything that had happened. The strategy, the fight, the loss of so many good people. He felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. They had won, yes, but at what cost? Lyra stepped up beside him, her presence comforting yet distant. She had changed over the past few weeks. No longer the princess who had hated humans, she had become a warrior, a leader, someone he could trust. But there was still a wall between them, one that neither of them had yet found a way to break down. You did it, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. You saved us. James turned to face her, feeling the weight of her words. We did it. This wasn't just me. It was all of us. The Varnorians, the humans, everyone who fought together. Lyra looked at him with a mix of admiration and something deeper, something unspoken. She had always been the princess, the one in charge, the one who made decisions for others. But now she was seeing James in a new light. He was not just an outsider anymore. He was part of this world, part of their future. I'm still not sure how to thank you, she said, her eyes meeting his. I never thought I would come to rely on a human, but you're not what I expected. James smiled, though it felt strange. He was still getting used to the idea of being more than just a foreigner. I'm just glad I could help. I couldn't have done it without you, though. You were there every step of the way. You showed me how to lead, how to fight." She nodded slowly, her gaze dropping for a moment before she met his eyes again. "We both did what we had to do. And now we can rebuild." James thought about the future, about the rebuilding of the Varnorian people, their society, their way of life. The war had left scars on the land, on the people. There would be challenges ahead, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. They had the strength to recover. They had each other. "What happens now?" James asked. The question lingered in the air between them, full of meaning. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for something beyond the battlefields. "Now we begin again. We rebuild what the Zorathians tried to destroy. We make this world stronger than before. And we find a way to work together. Humans and Varnorians." James nodded. He had always believed in the power of cooperation. It was what had kept humanity going for centuries, after all. Now he could see that it was the only way forward for Varner, too. As the days passed, James threw himself into the work of rebuilding the planet. There were many tasks to be done: reorganizing the military, helping the people recover from the war, and making sure the Zorathian threat didn't return. But there was something else he needed to do, something that had been on his mind since the day he arrived on Varner: the future of his relationship with Lyra. Their bond had grown stronger over the weeks. They had fought side by side, shared quiet moments of understanding, and learned to trust each other. But there was still an unspoken tension between them. James knew that Lyra was not the same person she had been when they first met. She had changed, and he had changed too. One evening, after another long day of work, James found himself in the royal garden. The air was cool, and the scent of alien flowers filled the air. He leaned against a stone pillar, waiting until he saw Lyra walking toward him, her royal cloak trailing behind her. "James," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "There's something I need to tell you." James straightened up, his heart racing. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, but he didn't want to assume. Not yet. Lyra stopped in front of him, her expression softening. "When you first arrived, I didn't want you here. I thought humans were beneath us, but you've proven me wrong. You've shown me what it means to be strong, to be a leader. And you've earned my respect." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "More than that, I think I've come to care for you, in a way that I didn't expect." James felt his heart skip a beat. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he had been too afraid to even hope for. Lyra had always been a mystery to him, beautiful, strong, but distant. Now she was standing here, opening up to him in a way that made everything feel possible. "I care for you, too," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never expected any of this, but now, I can't imagine my life without you." Lyra smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile like that. It was soft, genuine, and full of warmth. "Then we have a future, James, a future together, a future for us, for Varner, and for the humans who will join us here." James stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "A new beginning," he whispered. "A new beginning," she echoed, her fingers intertwining with his. Together, they looked toward the horizon, where the sun was finally setting on a new day. A new beginning for them all.